All right, today we're going to talk about Ruth chapter 4. Now, this is the final chapter in the book of Ruth. However, I think I'm going to do another video just about kind of more of a conclusion, more of an application video. And I'll try and publish that on the same day. That way you guys don't have to wait another week in order to watch it. But this fourth chapter really wraps things up, and really you see a complete turnaround from chapter 1. So we saw from chapter 3, Ruth had already gone to Boaz, and she had done some things to where it was kind of like a kinsman redeemer proposal, to where she's kind of proposing to him, hey, will you redeem me? You are a kinsman of my former husband, and according to the law, I'm supposed to marry you so that you can redeem me and we can raise up children, stuff like that. So she had already done that, and Boaz had already told her, I am willing to do that. However, there's someone else who has the first right, someone who is closer kinsman to Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, the father-in-law of Ruth. He says, there's someone who's a closer relative to you who has the first right, and I'll ask him if he is willing to redeem you, then great. I'm glad you're taken care of. But if not, then I will redeem you because you are such a virtuous woman because of all these different things. And Ruth goes home, and her mother-in-law tells her, this is great. He's not going to rest until he gets this matter settled. And that was the end of chapter 3. And now we're into chapter 4, and it jumps right into it. And it's very, very possible that Boaz did exactly that he went straight to the other kinsman to ask him about this. So it says that then went Boaz up to the gate in verse 1 and sat him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down. So now Boaz is going straight to this kinsman. He's going to the gate of the city, lots of witnesses. This is usually where different affairs were taken care of, where they were different matters, legal matters, stuff like that was taken care of. So he calls his relative. He says, hey, come here, I have something to talk to you about. So he comes over, and then he sees 10 other people, elders who were going to be witnesses in this situation. He says, hey, can you guys come over too? So they come on over, and we're not quite sure why he chose 10. The Bible does talk about how you need more than one witness, right? It can't just be one person saying you did something, and that can be taken as law, right? So they're saying you do need multiple witnesses, and Boaz got 10 of them. And later on, this does become a common practice, I believe, in marriages where they had 10 different witnesses, but it was many centuries later where that became more common. But it seems as though Boaz is taking no shortcuts here. He goes to 10 different people and says, can you come here and listen to this matter? So they're all surrounding him. They're listening to the matter. And Boaz does something very interesting. Instead of saying to this kinsman, will you redeem Ruth, the Moabitess? Because there may have been still some conflict between the Israelites and the Moabites because they had kind of a bad past, right? So he could have done that, and maybe the relative would have said, no, I don't want to redeem her. I don't want that reputation on my hands. I don't want to marry a Moabitess, something like that. But instead of that, he goes for a more tempting solution. And I find that very interesting. He wasn't trying to trick his relative into not marrying Ruth. It seems as though he was trying to almost go out of his way to get those two to marry, not because he wanted them to get married, but because he didn't want to say, I tricked you into not letting this happen. So he goes and he says, Naomi's come back, Elimelech's wife, and now she's trying to get someone to redeem her land, someone to purchase it. Will you redeem it? You are the closest kinsman, and I am the one after you. If you redeem it, great, but if not, then I'll redeem it. So this is pretty awesome for this guy, right? This near kinsman. He's thinking, oh, sweet, more land. So he's like, yeah, I'll do that. But then Boaz says to him, however, if you redeem the land, then you also have to redeem Ruth. So again, he didn't start with Ruth. He started with the land, which would have been a tempting proposition. But now he's talking about Ruth, who may not have been a very tempting proposition. So this guy, he says, ooh, actually, on second thought, I can't redeem the land. I can't redeem them because it will corrupt my inheritance. And he doesn't really go into an explanation on how it will corrupt his inheritance. It could have been that maybe he was saying, if I marry Ruth, then the children that she and I have, I'll have to give them an inheritance, and then the children that I have with my other wife or whoever, if he was married or not, I have to give them inheritance, and it'll split my inheritance. So maybe he was just saying that it'll corrupt my inheritance, or maybe he was trying to act as though the land was bad, the land wasn't good, and that he wasn't actually saying no to Ruth, but that he was saying no to the land. But again, he had just said yes to the land, and now when Ruth is added to the package deal, he says no. So he says, you can redeem it. He tells Boaz, you can redeem them if you want. So there's a ritual, a type of tradition that they had to do. It was something it's mentioned elsewhere in the Bible, where the man is supposed to take off his shoe. The person who is refusing to redeem the wife or the land is supposed to take off his shoe and give it to the person who is going to redeem them. And from what I've researched, it was meant to be a sign to say that I give you the right to walk on this land, to redeem it. You now have the right to the land. You can walk on it. It's your land now. So they give them their shoe, the right to walk on it. So the near kinsman gives Boaz the shoe, and Boaz says to all the witnesses, you guys are all witnesses of this. I now am going to redeem Ruth and the land. So they say, we're all witnesses of that, and they start pronouncing blessings on them. And I find the blessings to be very interesting, and I feel like we just miss it so often. They said, they start blessing the relationship. They say, let Ruth be like Rachel and Leah. Of course, those were the wives of Jacob, the father of Israel, or of the tribes of Israel. And they also said, and let her be like Tamar. Now, these are three women that they mention, and each of them have some significance, right? Leah would have been the great-great-great-great-grandmother of Judah, or not the great-grandmother of Judah, but of the tribe of Judah, which would have been Boaz's great-great-grandmother. So she was the mother of Judah, so she was, of course, the ancestor of the descendants of the tribe of Judah, making her Boaz's ancestor. So he could have been saying, let her be like Leah, who was also very fertile, very good at having babies. But then they also say, and let her be like Rachel. Well, Rachel wasn't the ancestor of Boaz, so why mention Rachel? Well, Rachel, for the longest time, had trouble having kids. And it wasn't until God blessed her and gave her children that she was able to have kids, right? So she tried and tried and tried to have children, but it wasn't until God blessed her and gave her the children that she was able to have it. And these elders, these 10 witnesses, seem to be pronouncing the same thing on Ruth, who had already been married, had already tried to have kids, right? She's been married, but he's saying, now let God bless her like he blessed Rachel and let her have children. And the same thing for Tamar. Tamar married the son of Judah. And then, of course, they didn't have kids, and that son died. So then Judah gave her to the other son, and that son died, and they still didn't have kids. So now Judah and Tamar actually have kids. So it could have been, by mentioning Tamar, they were actually saying, let her be like Tamar, who didn't have children in her first marriage, but let her have children now. Let God bless her. So there's so much significance to the three people that they mentioned that we so often overlook it. So then we go on, and it says, in verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And when he had went in unto her, so after they had done the deed, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. And we shouldn't miss this. It says the Lord gave her conception. So we see that the Lord's hand is at work in this whole story. Why didn't the Lord give her conception when she was married to her first husband? It seems as though God had waited until this time to bless her with a child. And sometimes I'll hear people say that, this child was an accident. He was unplanned. Well, no child was ever unplanned. God has always been planning children. His hand has always been at work. And if he blesses you with a child, it's because he wants you to have that child. So in this particular situation, that was definitely the case. It says God gave her conception. So she does get pregnant. It doesn't seem to imply that it was much longer after they were married. It seems as though the first time they do it, she gets pregnant. So then it says, and the women said unto Naomi. Now don't miss this. I keep telling you guys, the book of Ruth seems to revolve around the story of Naomi, because this verse is also a good evidence for that. It says, and the women said unto Naomi, not Ruth, Naomi, blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. All right, so there's kind of a little bit of confusion here. It's not actually, it seems to be referring to Boaz. It seems to be referring to Boaz and Ruth's child, Obed. So let's talk about several things here. They're saying, blessed is Naomi, who has someone to redeem her, which would have likely have been Boaz, who has become like a son-in-law to her. And then it goes on to talk about how now she has Ruth, who they claim is better than 7 sons. And then now she has a grandson who, according to the law, it's kind of confusing how that works. But this grandson of hers would be like a legal son, legally her son because of the redeeming law and stuff like that. It would, of course, have been Ruth's biological son, but Naomi would have been like a mother to it legally. So now they're saying, the women of the city are saying, Naomi, you are such a blessed woman. You have Boaz as a son-in-law. You have Ruth, who's better than 7 sons, and now you have a grandson / legal son. And it says Naomi is the one who takes care of her. I'm sure Ruth also took care of him. But it says Naomi is the one who nurses the child. And it's just so awesome to me to see that Naomi went from chapter 1, where she loses her husband, she loses her 2 sons, and she comes back to the land of Israel and she says, I went out with everything and God brought me back with nothing. She's saying, call me bitter. She's thinking that God's cursing her, God's afflicting her. She blames God for everything. And now when you get to the last chapter, all the people around Naomi are saying, God has blessed you. God has given you better than 7 sons with Ruth, and now he's given you another son with Obed, not to mention a son-in-law, Boaz. So it's like the story of Job, where he gets blessed after everything is taken away. God gives him a blessing, stuff like that. So we see that in verse 16, and Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom and became a nurse unto it. So again, she's the one taking care of it, because technically it's kind of like her legal son, but of course Ruth was the biological mother, and likely she was also taking care of it. But it seems as though this child brought joy back to Naomi. And it's awesome to see the transformation within Naomi during the story. Ruth seems to be the same throughout the story. Boaz seems to be the same throughout the story. It's Naomi who seems to have a huge shift in character. And then, of course, it starts listing the different genealogies of David, King David, because Obed was the great-grandfather, was the grandfather of David. So Ruth and Boaz would have been the great-grandparents of King David, which would have made them the great-great-great-great-great-grandparents of Jesus, because of course Jesus was in the line of David and David was in the line of Ruth and Boaz. So that's how this story ends, and it's kind of it's a really awesome ending to see the turnaround going from bad to good, going from being in the land of Moab where she was cursed, she lost her family, and then going back to Israel, and then she's blessed and she gains an even greater family. So that's the end of the book of Ruth. Hopefully you've liked this. Again, we're going to try and do an application video as well, and a little more of a conclusion, and kind of just comparing it to other stories. So hopefully you guys watch that video as well.
Hey everyone! If you liked the video, then feel free to click the like button. If you want to see more content like this one, then we recommend clicking subscribe and hitting the bell so that you can be notified anytime a video is uploaded or live streamed. Thank you!